what's my name? I'm Nina, and I'm from Tickety Boom Quantum Healing. So I am a past life regression hypnotherapist. So I am trained in the Dolores Cannon method of past life regression. Does anybody know the name Dolores Cannon? Yeah, okay. So what she did, she trained me, even though she died in 2014. All of her training was recorded in 2011. And so she has trained me. She's sort of channeled herself through the videos. So I am obviously part of her company, and her daughter Julia Cannon still runs that company. So it's really, really amazing. She was an amazing, incredible woman. So what is QHHT? Well, as I just said, it's past life regression, and you can visit through hypnosis, past lives, parallel lives, future lives, and the bit in between lives. So there's lots of amazing, fascinating places that you can visit through quantum healing hypnosis technique. So when I do the induction with a client, they will go to the very deepest state of trance, which is the theta state. Now, some people are a bit untrusting of hypnosis because they think that, they've watched the programs on TV, they think I'm going to potentially, do things that they're not aware of or that they're not in control of, make them hop on one leg and bark like a dog. And that is just absolutely not what I am going to do. So I regress people and take them to the theta state, which is a perfectly natural state. You go there twice a day anyway. You go there just before you fall asleep and just before you wake up. So it's a perfectly natural state, and it's the brainwave state that you are in just before you fall asleep, which is then delta. So it's the most relaxed state. So what does a session entail? Well, it involves a full day with me. They tend to take between 5 and 7 hours. Mine are a bit longer, just because I talk a lot, and I like to be very, very thorough. So it's broken up into 3 sections. So we do about a 2.5 hour interview where I need to find out everything about you. And there's an important reason for that, and that is because some of these things can show up in your past lives. So I need to find out who the relationships are in your life, who are the cast of characters in your life, because those characters, the important ones anyway, will most likely be reoccurring or have showed up somewhere in your past. So who are the people in your life? What are the themes in your life? What's happening in your life? What are the things that you have aspirations for in your life? Do you have any health conditions in your life that you are wondering why you have, or you want to understand the root cause to? So we do the interview, then we do the 2.5 hour regression, which is where I will obviously hypnotize you and take you into between 1 and 3 past lifetimes, which are always amazing. And then halfway through, I will ask your higher self to come through in the session. And in every session, before you come, I ask you to come with about 20 different questions that you want answering. So it might be, what is my soul purpose? Why am I here? How do I best support my children in this lifetime? I'm at a crossroads in my life, in my career. What path should I take? There's many different reasons. Or why do I have this particular health condition? Many reasons why somebody might come to a session, and they will bring those questions with them, and then I will ask them to you or your higher self, and your higher self will answer those questions for you. So it's quite mind-blowing, really. So, and that is the reason why I absolutely love this method, and I think it's just so undeniable. I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love having readings from a psychic medium. I bloody love them, they're like one of my favourite things to do. But I think that that doing this and the information is coming out of your mouth, because I'm not a psychic or a medium, I'm a hypnotherapist. So I'm not doing anything, I'm just facilitating and asking the right questions, that's all. You know, the information that is recorded, which I give to you after the session, by the way, you are talking for 2.5 hours. You'll hear me asking questions throughout the recording, but the majority of the information obviously has got to come out of your mouth to go on the recording so that you can listen to it afterwards, because you might have little or no memory of what you've said after the session. So the evidence is there in the recording. And actually it's interesting, because some of the clients that I've done afterwards, they've said, you just can't make it up. You know, you can't, because the past lives always correspond with what the higher self is saying. For somebody to concoct something that makes sense for 2.5 hours, that's completely unassociated, I just think it would be really hard to do. So, is everybody familiar with the term the higher self? Is there anybody that's not? Right, okay, don't worry. Right, I'm going to sort that out for you. So, so halfway through the hypnosis, obviously we connect with what we call the higher self. Some people call it the oversoul. So everybody's soul is massive. It's absolutely massive. I don't know quite how massive, I just know that apparently it's really, really, really massive. And your soul cannot, the whole of your soul cannot fit into your body. So I like to call it a soul shard that fits into your body. And I'm sure that you've heard of people saying, you know, everything's happening at the same time, and there is no time and all of this. And so actually, past lives are not actually past lives, they're all happening at the same time, which is true. We go up and down the levels rather than along and back. So you could have lots of shards of your soul living up lots of different lifetimes at the same time. And that's what we're doing, we're tapping into those lifetimes. So, whilst you've got little bits of your soul, obviously in bodies, there's still a massive part of your soul that is still existing outside of bodies, and that is the bit that is still connected to God or Source or everything else that you might, however you like to, you know, think of that. So everybody's bubbles, if you imagine them as souls or bubbles, all overlap. And when we're talking about collective consciousness and unity consciousness, when all of those bubbles overlap, we're talking about that energy or that information, that wisdom is transferred then throughout the collective. And that is the information that we are tapping into when we connect with the higher self, which is why they are so wise, which is why the information that comes through in a QHHT session when we're talking to the higher self is so profound, because it comes from a collective wisdom and a collective knowledge and information. So who is Dolores Cannon? A lot of people have been to my table, and I've asked you, some of you know who she is. So this is her method. She was an American lady. She was a normal hypnotherapist in the 1960s, and she did normal hypnotherapy, stop smoking, lose weight, that kind of thing. And then she got into past life regression. Just normal, just go into past lives. And then she started doing sessions, and things started going a bit weird, and she accidentally ended up at the point in between lives, and this kept happening, and the people kept describing the same places over and over again. So we're talking about the bit you want to call heaven, the bit in between lives, after you've died and before you go into your next life, you are somewhere. And there's places in this somewhere or heaven. And everybody is describing the same places, whether it's the healing place, the Hall of Records, the garden, the library, the tapestry of life. They're all describing the same places. So Dolores has written about 20 books. Some of them, you know, get quite advanced and quite complicated when she's talking about the quantum realm, but some beautiful books about like the places and different lifetimes that people have had. So that is who Dolores was, and as I've said, there's 75,000 practitioners that do what I do now around the world, and they are all obviously qualified in QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. So why are QHHT sessions so interesting, and why can they be so beneficial? So I'm going to tell you some of the fascinating sessions myself and other practitioners have had. But first of all, I'm going to tell you that sometimes lifetimes can just be really boring. And Dolores calls them digging potatoes lives. Because let's face it, there wasn't like loads and loads of different professions throughout time. So very often people had simple lives, or they were a farmer, or they looked after sheep or something like that. So they can be quite simple, but it's in the detail in those lives. It's in the detail and the lessons where the magic is. And that is where it's just so fascinating. So, I'm going to now tell you about a couple of my clients' past lives and tell you why, so that you can understand why a QHHT session might be beneficial. Because you're like, well, why would you have past life regression? You know, is it just because you're interested in the lives that you've had? Well, yeah, you know, some people just want one because they're curious. But then some people, it can have really beneficial effects and reasons to have one. You can find out a lot of information. So this particular client of mine was wanting direction in her life. So she's really ambitious, she's really career driven, but at the same time she's really family orientated. She's got 2 young families, she loves her home, she loves entertaining at home with family and getting other friends round and kids and stuff. But she had this goal where she was like, I want my career to carry on going sky high, and I want to earn £100,000. That's my goal. When I get £100,000 salary, that'll be my pinnacle. That's what I want. That's what I'm aiming for. But she knew that if she was going to do that, then she would potentially have to sacrifice something else, because there was going to have to be that exchange, that balance, because it was going to have to take a lot more responsibility, longer hours maybe in work and stuff, and was that going to be appropriate for her or not? So basically, we took her into the first life. So we took her into the first life, and this is what happens. I have to get them to describe what they're seeing, because I can't see what they're seeing. And basically, it's like story time every time you do a session. It's wonderful because you can, you know, when you read a book or someone's telling you something, you can visualize it in your head, can't you? And so whenever somebody's telling me about where they're going on a past life regression, it's just wonderful, because I'm like, oh, where are we going to go today? So first of all, when somebody first comes into a lifetime, it can be a bit cloudy, so we try and clear that up. And she saw dirty little feet. Dirty little boy feet, and they were her feet. So I asked her to look up her body, and she's describing wearing little shorts, and she stood on a cobbled street, and it's dirty and it's smoggy. And during the session we figure out she's in Victorian England, and she's a little boy in Victorian England. So there's smog and it's cloudy and it's grey. You can just imagine, can't you? It's just drab and miserable. And I ask her to go and stand outside where she lives. So she goes to a house, and it's a row of terrace houses on a terrace street, and there's this very simple, you know, quite poor little house, and I ask him to go into the house and describe the first thing that he sees. So there's only 2 rooms downstairs, and the first thing he sees is a tin bath in the kitchen, and there's an older lady and she's cooking a meal in the corner, and this happens to be his grandma. And he loves his grandma, he absolutely adores his grandma, and his grandma adores him. This life is quite poor, but it doesn't matter because there's so much love in this life. Now, when I do a session, I also move people through the lifetime to establish, like, you know, the main, most important parts of the life, and to sort of get a picture of the whole life. So I then move it gets a bit confusing. I then move my client forward as the little boy, and he grows up and he becomes a blacksmith. And he meets a lady and he falls in love, and it's a really loving relationship. The grandma's still alive, it's wonderful. At some point, very sadly, the grandma dies. This is really, 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 really sad for him because, you know, she was his only family member because his parents had died. So the grandma had brought him up. And then his wife goes on to get pregnant. And then very sadly, she and his first daughter die in childbirth as well. So those aspects of the life were very, very sad. But the important and overwhelming feeling of the whole lifetime was that he knew great love in that life. Then we move into the next life, and this one we establish again by looking at the ground that we're somewhere very sandy. It's a completely different place, it's hot, and it's somewhere either Egyptian-y, Arabian-y, it's over in the east somewhere, and I get her to describe her feet, and she's wearing cream and gold silk shoes and a cream and gold silk outfit, and she has gold jewellery on with rubies, and she has dark skin. So we established that she's a grown woman at this point where we enter this lifetime, and it's very, very different. There's a lot of wealth in this life. And her 3-year-old little boy is running around nearby, and she stood outside her house in a sort of a courtyard area with a water feature in the middle, and it's a very, very big house. It's sort of made of sand and stone, but low level, but big, and she's then sat in the shade with other women. Culturally, it seemed appropriate, like at that time as well. She was sat with other women and they were talking in the shade. Anyway, the difference with this life is that she was extremely unhappy. She was married to a very cruel man. He didn't care for her, and she was thoroughly miserable in this life. So I move her forward, and it's a few years, because I think from memory the son was about 6 at this point, and she was walking across the desert, and she was going to the next village. She was running away from her husband, and she wanted to find her father to try and keep her safe from her husband, who she knew would try and kill her for leaving him, because you just don't do that in that time. So she reaches the next village, she finds her father, she begs him to hide her. He's like, you must go back, you cannot be here, you can't do this, you must go back. Then her brother came along, and he is like even more adamant. You must go back to your husband, you cannot be here, shame on family, you know, all of this. And must have somehow contacted the husband who came, took the son away from her, stuck her on the back of a cart and took her back to the house. Put her in a room with no windows and no water or food, and she described how stifling and hot it was in there, and how like scared she was. And then later on he came in and strangled her to death. So when we then get to the point where I asked the higher self to come through, I said, why did you show her those 2 lifetimes? And they said, because she's never happy. I'm not joking, this woman decorates her house like 2 or 3 times a year. She's a very dear friend, so she won't mind me saying that. So she's always wanting the next best thing, and she's always looking forward, but not necessarily enjoying what she has. And the higher self said, we showed her those lifetimes, because in the first lifetime, she had nothing, yet she had everything. And in the second lifetime, she had everything, yet she had nothing. And I thought that was so powerful. So they said to her, she can of course go for that £100,000 a year job. We all have free will, we can all do whatever we want. But there will be sacrifices then that will be made for other things. And they said that going for that role would ultimately take her away from what was most important to her, which was her family. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Then there's another very interesting one here. And this is about a client who came for quite a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that she came was she wanted to address some health conditions. So she has a skin condition called PXE, and it's all over her neck and the front of her chest and her arms, the front of her arms, and she also has eczema on top of the PXE, like to make it even worse. So it's really red, it's really angry, and it gets inflamed, and it's really itchy and uncomfortable, and she finds it really unsightly, and you know, it's just not great, yeah? And so she was wondering, you know, well, why do I have this, and is there anything that we can do? Because there is a healing element to this in working with the higher self. Again, I'm not a healer, I'm not doing any of this, but the higher self, I can facilitate potentially, if it is appropriate, and I'll come to that in a short while, that healing can be achieved within the session. So, so she got this skin condition. Anyway, I took her into the past lifetime, and she's an American soldier in Vietnam. And in this particular scene that we were in, she wasn't actually, you know, in the jungle like fighting and shooting at this point. She was actually in the village sort of base where he was a he, where he was, you know, a soldier, and he was with his comrades at this point, and there's an explosion, a really big explosion, because it's being attacked. And it goes off right nearby. The majority of his comrades are killed. He does survive, by the way, he doesn't die, but he gets the full force of the explosion, and it's all on his neck and his chest and the fronts of his arms. And she can feel it. She's describing the feeling of this heat and this burning. So, and don't worry, by the way, I immediately take that away within the session. So that's not something that you would experience. But yeah, then I was like, oh my God, well, that's where that's come from. So lots of times trauma can be brought through from past lives into this life. And if you don't need it, what's the point in having it? You know, if it's just something traumatic in a memory, we can potentially release that so that you're not reliving it or heal it. So I asked the higher self if there's any healing that they could do at that point. And she said that she felt this cooling wave go all the way across her neck and her chest and her arms, and she was feeling this cooling at skin level. So I thought, oh, that's wonderful. And then I asked the higher self if they'd finished the healing within the session, and they said, no, we're going to carry on over the next few nights, which they do say quite a lot, actually. When you're asleep, when you're out of the way, they will carry on doing the healing. So I gave her a call a few weeks later. This was about, a few days later. This was about 6 months ago. I gave her a call a few days later. I said, how are you getting on? Have you noticed any improvement in skin? She went, oh my God, it's amazing. She said, like, all the red has gone out of the eczema in particular, because There's not as much that you can do with the PXE because it's like it changes the texture of the skin. It's really quite strange, but it looks like burnt skin. But all of the redness had gone out of the eczema, and it wasn't itchy anymore. You know, she wasn't having the flare-ups, and she wasn't having to wear the really strong steroid cream anymore. So I was like, this is brilliant. And actually, I gave her a call this week, and I said to her, can you give me a follow-up on how your skin's doing? And she said, well, it has come back a little bit. She said, but it is so much better. And I said to her, well, how many times have you listened to your session since we did it? And she went, oh, well, I just listened to it the once. So I said, right. I said, what Dolores Cannon always says is that if you've ever had healing in any of your sessions, it's really, really great to keep listening to that message. You know, not necessarily the whole session, but particularly that healing element of it. Keep listening to it so that it sort of like reinforces it within your subconscious to, you know, really keep that message in there to maintain that. So yeah, so like that one, that's interesting, isn't it? So there's many reasons why there can be issues in lifetimes, and obviously we like to find those out. Another thing which is very, very interesting about past lifetimes, and that can travel through lifetimes, is karma. It's like a pretty major one, to be honest. So I'm sure like karmic debt, karmic relationships, you know, those people that you have a nightmare with in this life. You've probably had a nightmare with them before as well. So you come in here because Earth is a school. You need to be learning your lessons. You need to be trying to figure that out with people, or put your boundaries in place. Whatever it is that you need to achieve and learn within your lifetime. So karma is another very, very interesting thing about past lifetimes. And I'm going to tell you a really super interesting thing about karma, and it's actually a session that Dolores did with somebody. So somebody came to her that was born blind, and they said to her, Dolores, I want you to heal my sight, which, believe it or not, is potentially doable if it's appropriate and by somebody as amazing as Dolores. I'm not going to say that I can achieve anything like that, but she was an amazing lady. So this lady came to her that was born blind and said, I want you to heal my sight. And they got to the higher self bit, and Dolores said, you know, well, we want you to heal the sight. And the higher self said, no, we can't do that. And Dolores said, well, why? And they said, because in a past lifetime, she was some sort of ruler in ancient wherever, and her favourite punishment was to gouge people's eyes out. So, karma always has to be repaid. There always has to be balance. Now, there is no hell and there is no punishment. So we're not saying that this lady had to come into this life blind as a punishment. We're all here just to experience, and it's about learning. And anyway, that lady will have agreed and chosen to return without her sight. So there's nothing that we have happen in our life that we don't agree to. So, but it is to balance that out. So she took all those people's sight in that life, which meant that she had to experience life without sight. It's fascinating, isn't it? So, as I said, Earth is a school. There's no right or wrong, and it's simply lessons along the path of learning and ascension, and to experience, and for all that information to go into the collective. So it's really, really great. And at the end of everybody's life, and I'm sure that you've heard the near-death experience people say that their life has flashed before their eyes. And that is because you do a life review. So we do all of these learning and these lessons here, and then it's like, well, you know, what do we do with it all at the end of it? So you do a review to figure out whether you've done really well at it or not. And all of this information is kept somewhere. Who's heard of the Akashic Records? Okay. So Dolores also calls it the Hall of Records. So this is a place where there is a record of every single lifetime that there has ever been. And I have a very, very, well, I'll tell you that in a sec. So yeah, so basically you review your life at the end of the life, and what you're able to do, some people see it as a book, some people see it as like a holographic sort of like thing that you're watching, and what you're able to do within that life is if you were really, really not nice to somebody, you're able to step into that person's shoes in this review and experience how you made them experience how you made them feel. So it's also another level of learning after you've done the live to say, you know, and you've got your counsel there supporting you, and they're saying, well, how do you think that you did in that? And you're like, well, I'm not sure that I did like such a great job of that lifetime. You know, like, or what do you think you could do better? Well, okay, well, and you get to come back and do it all over again. Yay! So, but the really, really interesting thing about the Hall of Records is, if somebody's planning to do a really difficult life, then obviously they're going to want to do some research. They're going to want to do some planning. There's no point in setting them up for a really difficult life that are just going to fail in and it just not work out. So they obviously do a bit of referencing. So anybody can go to the Hall of Records on the other side and find examples of amazing leaders. So for example, Cleopatra, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, and they can have a look at those lives to see how they did it really, really well. If they wanted to come back as a leader of some sort, I'm going to go and review their life because they did it really, really well. The thing is when that life has been reviewed by that soul, it's then imprinted on them as if they have lived that life. Hence the reason why there's like 1,000 Cleopatras, 2,000 Julius Caesars. So for all those non-believers out there that say, oh, past life regression is a load of rubbish because there's about 10 million Cleopatras, that is the reason why. Because people will review those lives and then they're imprinted on them for the experience. So it's super fascinating. So, as you can see, visiting past lifetimes is a fascinating experience, and so much can be learned and healed through them. You can even have loved ones come through when speaking to the higher self, so I've done that quite a few times, where loved ones have come directly through, and other higher beings and ascended masters, so it's like super interesting. So I could literally talk all day, but I really don't have time for that, and I want to do a short guided meditation with you for this last time. So I really hope that you've enjoyed that. You can gently come around now. When you are ready, you can gently open your eyes. And I would like you to take this beautiful, relaxing energy with you. I hope it stays with you all day. Thank you so much. You enjoyed it. Yes, it is.